the one area which I think is a little bit worrying for employers is the government is talking about the possibility of class actions in discrimination law. Those of you who sort of look at the comparative experience of the US on this might be familiar with the extremely large suits that happen from time to time, multi-million pounds being claimed in class action suits for discrimination in the States. And I think personally that would be a great shame if we went down that route wholeheartedly. But the government says, in principle, there's no reason why multiple actions in discrimination law shouldn't be allowed in future. They're not at the moment. So that's one to look for. I'd entitled this slide More Lunacy from Europe, and that's probably because I just had read the Ainsworth decision for the first time. This is the one which says if you have somebody on long-term sick, they should be entitled to take holiday, and if the member state decides they can't take holiday while they're off sick, then they should be allowed to accrue it over various years, and they should be, on termination, allowed to be paid in lieu of all their accrued holiday. Now, I think I think there's a lot of leeway actually for the House of Lords, who now have to interpret that decision back into the UK to put some sense into this situation. But I think it's a nonsense, personally, from my perspective, to allow people to take holiday during sick leave. It just seems to me to be incompatible. And if you have somebody on PHI, how does that work? Are they allowed to take holiday from being on permanent health insurance? Does that change their employment status completely? Do they have to reapply for PHI once they come back from their holiday? So I think it's, I just think we've seen a string of European decisions in the last year or two which are frankly unhelpful and difficult to work out how they work in practice. And, as I've seen for many years actually, it's only the UK who really take these things very seriously and try and enforce these rights. Whenever I get together with my colleagues from France, Spain, Germany, etc., they actually laugh at the pickle we've got into over TUPE. They cannot understand how we've got into the situation where people can't agree changes to their contract like they normally can do, just because there's been a TUPE transfer beforehand. And that I think this Ainsworth decision, I think, is going to be another aspect of that. The House of Lords will rule, so we don't know quite exactly how this is going to be incorporated into English law. So stay the same at the moment for what you're doing, but who knows? The Temporary Workers Directive. Sorry, I've missed out the opt-out here. Now, the opt-out was something that we bargained for years ago under the John Major years, but it's been kept and actually increasingly appreciated by other member states. But the European Parliament recently voted for it to be scrapped. But apparently the Council of Ministers got together and said, we're just going to ignore the European Parliament. So the opt-out is secure for now, which I think was very popular in the UK for both employers and employees. You might have seen the Temporary Workers Directive. Obviously, media companies use a lot of people from temp agencies. In December 2011, this legislation must be enforced to give equal treatment in basic conditions after 12 weeks. Now, how much of an issue that will be in practice, I don't know. It depends what you mean by equal treatment, and it depends what you mean by basic conditions as well. But hopefully we'll have a relatively user-friendly version of that in English law. I know I'm coming up to the end of my half hour, so just a few more bits and pieces. April Fool's Day is going to be quite a big one this year. We're going to get the right to request flexible working for all carers of children aged 16 or under. What the statistics show is that the right to request has been, as I said before, much appreciated. I think something like 70 to 80% of requests are agreed to. I remember when the right to request was being talked about by government ministers. I was at a conference where one of the government ministers was talking about this concept, and of course people were very sceptical of it because, okay, you get a right to request, but you don't get the right for people to say yes to it. But actually it's worked very well because it provides a forum for people to talk about these things and the ability of the employer to say no if it really doesn't work. We've also got the increased holiday under the working time regs from April Fool's Day, so for full-timers, 28 days a year. I've mentioned disability associated discrimination. That's one to look out for. And, age-associated discrimination too. If someone is directly discriminated or harassed because they're looking after somebody who's an elderly parent, then they could claim age discrimination. And obviously that's an uncapped claim. Do be aware, though, this only applies in disability at the moment to direct discrimination and harassment, so it doesn't apply to reasonable adjustments or disability-related discrimination, which are the main two areas you see being litigated. Finally, the government has just recently confirmed, despite Mandelson being a bit hesitant on some of these new rights, that dads will be able to pick up some of mum's maternity leave and pay if the mum wants to come back to work earlier than the year. So I think the current proposal is the dad could pick up the second 6 months and any pay rights that go with that. So that would be quite interesting to see how that goes. I know, again, Harriet Harman is very pro that proposal. I'm really running out of time now, but just to say the Heyday case, this is the challenge to the rule that people can be forced to retire at 65. The decision on that in the European Court of Justice is due in the next 2 or 3 days. So watch out for that one. Plenty of tribunal cases being stayed, waiting on the outcome of that. Lots of legislation about partnerships and forcing people to retire there, but not many media companies are partnerships. So if you want to talk to me about that, then please catch me at lunch later. One tip for the top, I think equal pay claims are going to be a big issue for all companies and particularly media companies in the next 10 years. I think there's a really big push now for this transparency issue, and the government at the moment are very committed to closing these gaps. So we're going to see that being an issue, and although again I don't think it's really very common in the media world, service-related pay is still under attack. This idea that you can just pay people more because they've been with you longer. It's technically lawful under European law, but there is a loophole, and there's a case at the moment called Wilson, which is trying to make that loophole as wide as possible. Finally, disability rights. The House of Lords have ruled that the correct comparator when you're looking at disability-related discrimination is somebody who isn't disabled, and that, by a stroke, means the rights are halved. So I think we're going to see something in legislation to change that. But at the moment, it's a lot easier for employers to win disability cases. So it might be worth looking at that if you've got a disability case on the go at the moment. Finally, more redundancy pay. The government said, actually, we really don't give very much in redundancy pay. Let's have a look at that. The bonus culture to end, ha ha ha. Of course it won't. I just think it will just be driven underground as it always has been. And more practical tips, a greater scrutiny on freelancers from the Inland Revenue. We're seeing a lot more challenges on that. More holiday pay requests from your workers. Those are the group of people between employee and freelancer. Lots of people are getting wise to that category and the holiday pay advantages, particularly in the media sector at the moment. And when you're downsizing, all your freelancers are much more likely to say, well, actually, we were employees, so we want employment rights and redundancy pay. And we're seeing a lot of those kind of challenges and fending those off for media companies at the moment. And that's it. I hope I haven't gone too far beyond my allotted time.